I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who would be told to pack up her life at 62 years old because an unborn baby needed peace and quiet. But that's exactly what happened to me, and I'm still asking myself if I was wrong for how I reacted. My own daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eye, one hand on her pregnant belly, and told me I had to move out of the house I helped pay for, the house I helped raise my son in, because my presence was stressful for her baby. I remember standing there, my ears ringing, my mouth dry, wondering if this was real life or some kind of cruel joke. So I need you to tell me, honestly, if you were in my place, would you have just quietly left, or would you have done what I did? To understand how everything got this bad, I have to go back a few years, back to when I thought my life was finally settling into something calm and predictable. I'm a widow. My husband passed away 8 years ago after a short, brutal battle with cancer. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. He worked his whole life, I worked part-time while raising our son, and we paid off our small house together. When he died, the silence in that house nearly swallowed me whole. My son, Adam, was already grown and living in the city by then, and every time he left after a visit, I felt like I was being abandoned all over again. I tried to be strong, to tell myself that this was just the natural order of things, but the loneliness was heavy, like a physical weight on my chest. Adam is my only child. I poured everything into him. I'm not saying I was perfect, but I loved him fiercely. He was a good kid, a little sensitive, a little too eager to please, but kind. When he told me he was dating someone seriously, I was thrilled. When he introduced me to his girlfriend, Lily, I did my best to be welcoming. She was pretty, very confident, and outspoken in a way I wasn't used to. She had strong opinions about everything, from food to politics to how people should live their lives. At first, I told myself that was a good thing. She seemed modern, ambitious, and she clearly adored Adam. I wanted to like her. I really did. When they got engaged, Adam sat me down and asked me something that surprised me. He said rent in the city was getting ridiculous. Lily was still finishing her degree, and they were struggling to save for a future. He asked if they could move into my house for a while. He said it would just be temporary, a year or two at most, until they got on their feet and could buy their own place. The idea of not being alone anymore filled me with such relief that I didn't hesitate. I told him yes immediately. I even told him they didn't need to pay rent, just help with utilities and groceries. In my mind, it was a win-win. I'd have my son close again, I'd help them get a start, and the house would feel alive. When Lily moved in, though, the atmosphere shifted almost instantly. She was polite on the surface, always smiling and saying thank you, but there was an undercurrent of tension I couldn't quite put my finger on. She reorganized my kitchen within the first week because it made more sense this way. She commented on my decor, suggesting it was a bit dated. She corrected me when I spoke, especially if I used old-fashioned phrases. I swallowed my discomfort and told myself I was being oversensitive. This was her home too now, I reminded myself. I didn't want to be the stereotypical overbearing mother-in-law. Adam, bless him, tried to keep the peace. If Lily complained about something, he'd gently ask me if I could adjust. If I mentioned feeling pushed aside, he'd tell me she was just stressed from school. I kept giving and giving, bending myself into smaller shapes so everyone else could be comfortable. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was worth it to have family around. About a year after they moved in, Lily announced she was pregnant. Adam was over the moon. He hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, laughing and crying at the same time. I was shocked but happy too. A grandchild, something to look forward to, something to bring even more life into the house. I congratulated Lily, told her how excited I was, and offered to help however I could. She smiled, thanked me, but there was something guarded in her eyes that made my stomach twist. As the pregnancy progressed, Lily's attitude toward me changed in ways that were hard to ignore. Everything I did seemed to irritate her. If I cooked something with a strong smell, she'd complain about nausea. If I watched TV in the living room, she'd say the noise gave her a headache. If I asked how she was feeling, she'd snap that she didn't want to talk about it. Adam would apologize on her behalf, saying hormones were making things hard, and I tried to be understanding. I remembered being pregnant myself, how emotional and uncomfortable it could be. Still, it hurt. I started feeling like a guest in my own home. Lily began referring to the house as ours when talking to friends, rarely acknowledging that it was mine. She made plans for the baby's nursery in what had always been my sewing room without asking me. When I gently pointed out that the room was important to me, she sighed dramatically and said, "Well, sacrifices have to be made when a baby is coming." Adam avoided my eyes during that conversation, which hurt more than anything Lily said. One evening, when Lily was about 7 months pregnant, she asked if we could all sit down and talk. Her tone was serious, and my heart immediately started racing. I had a feeling this wasn't going to be a pleasant chat. Adam sat beside her, his hand protectively on her back. I sat across from them at the dining table, the same table where I'd eaten countless family meals, celebrated birthdays, and once helped Adam with his homework late into the night. Lily took a deep breath and started talking about how important a calm environment was for a newborn. She talked about studies she'd read, about stress levels, about sleep schedules. I listened quietly, nodding, thinking she was about to set some house rules or ask for specific quiet hours. I was already preparing to agree, to compromise, to do whatever was needed. Then she said it. She said that after the baby was born, it would be best if I moved out. She said the baby would need the house to themselves, that having an older person around would disrupt bonding, that I deserved my own space. Anyway, I laughed at first. I genuinely thought she was joking. When I realized she wasn't, when I saw how serious her face was, how Adam stared down at the table instead of defending me, I felt something crack inside my chest. I asked her where she thought I was supposed to go. She shrugged and said maybe I could downsize, or move in with a friend, or find a small apartment. She said it like she was suggesting a new brand of tea to try. I reminded her, as calmly as I could, that this was my house, that I had invited them in to help them, that I had nowhere else to go. Lily's expression hardened. She said that being a grandmother was a privilege, not a right, and that if I wanted to be involved in the baby's life, I needed to respect her boundaries as a mother. Adam finally spoke up then, his voice quiet, and said maybe we could figure something out, and that maybe I could stay with a friend for the first few months. I don't think I've ever felt so invisible, so disposable. I went to my room that night and cried until my eyes were swollen shut. Memories of my husband flooded back, of the life we'd built, of the promise we'd made to grow old together in that house. And now I was being told to leave it behind because I was inconvenient. The days after that conversation were tense and awkward. Lily acted as if the decision had already been made. She talked openly about redecorating once I was gone. Adam avoided serious conversations, always saying he was stressed about becoming a father and didn't want conflict. I started to feel like I was losing my son, not to marriage, but to someone who saw me as an obstacle. I began quietly preparing for the possibility that I might actually have to leave. I looked at rental listings, my hands shaking as I calculated what I could afford on my limited income. The thought of starting over at my age, of packing up decades of memories, was overwhelming. At the same time, a deep anger was growing inside me. I felt betrayed. I felt used. I had supported them financially and emotionally, and now I was being pushed aside. One afternoon, while Lily was out, I tried to talk to Adam alone. I told him how hurt I was, how scared I was, how I felt like I was being erased from my own life. He listened, tears in his eyes, and said he didn't want me to leave, but he didn't know how to stand up to Lily without causing stress for the baby. He said he was stuck in the middle. I wanted to scream that I was the one being asked to give up everything, but instead I hugged him and told him I loved him. Inside, though, something shifted. I realized that if I didn't stand up for myself, no one else was going to. So that's where things stood. A pregnant daughter-in-law who wanted me gone, a son who wouldn't choose a side, and me, lying awake at night in the house I owned, wondering how it had become a place where I no longer felt welcome. This was the situation I was in, and I had a decision to make. Before I tell you what I did next, before I tell you how far this went and how it all finally exploded, I want you to pause and really think about it. If you were me, if your child's partner told you to move out of your own home for the sake of their baby, what would you have done? Would you have sacrificed everything to keep the peace, or would you have fought back? Let me know, because what happened next changed everything, and not in a way any of us expected. After that night, after lying there staring at the ceiling and listening to the familiar creaks of the house that suddenly felt like it didn't belong to me anymore, something hardened inside my chest. I wasn't just sad or scared anymore. I was angry, but it was a quiet, steady anger, the kind that comes when you finally realize how deeply someone has wronged you. I still went about my days as usual. I made tea in the mornings, watered my plants, folded laundry, and tried to keep things normal on the surface. Lily acted cheerful, almost relieved, as if my silence meant agreement. Adam hovered around awkwardly, trying to make everyone happy and failing miserably. And all the while, I was thinking, planning, asking myself how my life had come to this and what I was actually willing to give up. A few days later, Lily's mother came to visit. That woman swept into my house like she owned the place, loud, opinionated, and immediately critical. She praised Lily endlessly, rubbed her belly like it was public property, and barely acknowledged me. At one point, while I was in the kitchen making coffee, I overheard them in the living room. Lily was talking about how hard it was to prepare for a baby with so many people in the house. Her mother said, and I remember this word for word because it burned into my brain, "Well, it's time she steps aside. You and the baby are the priority now." They didn't even lower their voices. They didn't care that I could hear. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just a passing pregnancy mood. This was a plan I wasn't part of. That evening, I asked Lily directly if her mother's words reflected how she felt. Lily didn't deny it. She said becoming a mother meant putting her child first, and that if I truly loved my grandchild, I'd understand that sacrifices were necessary. I asked her why the sacrifice always seemed to be mine. She replied, calmly and coldly, that I had already lived my life, and now it was her turn to build hers. Adam sat there again, silent, staring at his hands. In that moment, my heart broke a second time, but this time I didn't cry. I just nodded and went to my room. That night, I pulled out the old folder where I kept all my important documents, deeds, bank statements, insurance papers. I hadn't looked at them in years. As I went through them, something strange happened. I started to feel grounded. This house wasn't just emotionally mine, it was legally mine, fully paid off, my name alone on the deed. Everything I had worked for with my husband was right there in black and white. And suddenly, I realized how absurd this whole situation was. I wasn't being asked to leave because I had no power. I was being asked to leave because they assumed I wouldn't use it. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Even dialing the number made my hands shake. But once I started talking, the words poured out of me. I explained everything, the living arrangement, the pregnancy, the pressure to move out. The lawyer listened carefully and then said something that made me sit back in my chair and stare at the wall. He said, "You are under no obligation to leave your home. In fact, you have every right to ask them to leave if the arrangement no longer works for you. Ask them to leave." The idea felt shocking and almost cruel at first. This was my son, my unborn grandchild. But then I thought about all the nights I'd cried alone, all the times I'd been dismissed, all the ways my kindness had been mistaken for weakness. I didn't want to hurt anyone, but I also couldn't let myself be erased. I didn't act immediately. Part of me still hoped Adam would come to his senses. I waited, I watched, and Lily, emboldened by my silence, grew bolder. She started making changes without asking. She boxed up some of my things from shared spaces, saying she was decluttering for the baby. One afternoon, I came home from grocery shopping to find my old armchair moved into the garage because it didn't fit the new vibe. That chair had been my husband's favorite spot. I sat down on the stairs and cried for the first time in weeks. That night, I told Adam everything about the lawyer, about my feelings, about how close I was to breaking. I told him I felt like I'd lost him. He cried too. He said he loved me and didn't want me to feel this way, but he also said Lily was under a lot of stress and he didn't want to rock the boat, so close to the baby's due date. That was when something inside me finally snapped. I told him very calmly that the boat was already sinking and I was the one drowning. A week later, I made my decision. I asked them both to sit down with me. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear my own voice at first. But once I started, I didn't stop. I told them that I had invited them into my home out of love and support, not to be pushed aside. I told Lily that I respected her as a mother-to-be, but I would not be bullied out of my own house. I told Adam that I loved him more than anything, but I couldn't keep sacrificing my dignity for his comfort. Then I said the words that changed everything. I told them that if living together was causing so much stress, then perhaps it was time for them to find their own place. I offered them a reasonable timeline and even financial help for the deposit, because despite everything, I still wanted my son to succeed. The silence that followed was deafening. Lily's face went red. She accused me of being heartless, of choosing money and property over family. She said I was punishing her for being pregnant. Adam looked like he was going to be sick. He begged me to reconsider, saying this would tear the family apart. I told him quietly that the family was already being torn apart, and pretending otherwise wouldn't fix it. The days that followed were chaos. Lily called her mother, who called me and screamed down the phone, calling me selfish and cruel. Extended family members started reaching out, clearly only hearing Lily's version of the story. Some sided with her, saying a grandmother should put her grandchild first. Others were more hesitant, asking why a young couple expected an older woman to leave her own home. I felt exposed, judged, exhausted, but underneath it all, I felt something else too, relief. Adam and Lily eventually started apartment hunting. The atmosphere in the house was icy. Lily barely spoke to me unless absolutely necessary. Adam was distant, torn between loyalty and resentment. When they finally moved out, Lily was 8.5 months pregnant. Watching them load their boxes into a rented truck was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I hugged Adam and told him my door would always be open. Lily stood a few feet away, arms crossed, eyes cold. For a while after they left, the house was quiet again. Too quiet. I wondered if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Nights were the worst. I'd replay everything over and over, questioning myself, imagining the baby growing up without knowing me, without this house as part of their story. When Adam called to tell me the baby had been born, a healthy little boy, I cried with joy and heartbreak at the same time. Lily didn't want me at the hospital. She said she needed space. I respected that, even though it hurt deeply. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, things began to shift. Adam started visiting alone at first, bringing photos of the baby, telling me about sleepless nights and new parent panic. He admitted they were struggling financially, that living on their own was harder than they'd expected. He apologized more than once for not standing up for me sooner. I forgave him because he's my son, and because I could see the weight of his choices pressing down on him. Lily took longer, much longer. At first, she kept her distance, controlling access to the baby. I won't lie, that nearly broke me, but I didn't beg, I didn't argue. I stayed calm and consistent. I sent gifts, respectful messages, and kept my boundaries firm. Over time, cracks appeared in her anger. Motherhood humbled her in ways I don't think she expected. One afternoon, months later, she showed up at my door with the baby. She looked exhausted, different. She didn't apologize outright, but she said she hadn't realized how hard it was to do everything alone. She asked if I could watch the baby for an hour so she could shower and sleep. I took my grandson into my arms and something inside me healed. Not completely, but enough. Lily and I are not close friends now. We may never be. But there's an uneasy respect there, built on the understanding that I will not be pushed aside. And I will not push myself into spaces where I'm not wanted. Looking back, I still ask myself if I did the right thing. I lost time I'll never get back. I damaged relationships, but I also saved myself. I kept my home, my independence, my sense of self. I taught my son that love doesn't mean erasing yourself. And I showed my daughter-in-law that boundaries go both ways, so that's how it ended. Not with a dramatic showdown or perfect reconciliation, but with hard lessons and slow healing. If you've made it this far, I want to ask you one last time, honestly, after hearing everything, do you think I was wrong for standing my ground? Like this video if you were on my side. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this, and share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments. I read them all. I'll see you in the next story.